going to show us how to do, great. Tom's going to show us how to do simple tabletop setups for macro and other detail shots. You've probably seen his work. He volunteers at Lewis Ginter and takes a lot of shots there, and they end up using a lot of his shots for their marketing and social media. And he's got beautiful art up at Crossroads. He has a wall at Crossroads that he has up. And the link to his website is in this event. You should check it out. He's got some beautiful work. So without further ado, Tom, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Lara. Thank you for setting this up. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm calling this floral portraits, or more realistically, tabletop photography, because that's really how I started out. Let me say something. Okay. Back about 10 years ago, when I got my first digital SLR, I also got a macro lens, and I bought some roses for my wife, although I told her they were for her, but they were really for me. I wanted to photograph them. And so I did this photograph on my kitchen table. All I used for the light was the pendant light above the kitchen table. And I had the camera set up, and I took the photograph, and you know, I edited it, and I'm very happy with it. That's the type of thing that I like to do. And so for a setup like this, all I had was the kitchen table light. And because I zoomed in close, I didn't need to worry about a background. So the whole thing about tabletop photography is control. You can control your subject. You can control the lighting, and you can control the background. And that gives you an awful lot of options and a lot of control that you can work with. Here's a photograph that I took out at Lewis Ginter a couple of years ago. It was an absolutely beautiful iris out there. The problem with it is that, to me, the background is not very nice. The background is overly busy. And so I kept my depth of field pretty shallow so that I didn't have the background become even more intense. That was something that I was really trying to work with, is get this really nice photograph of this flower, but not have the background intrude. So for this purpose, I kept my depth of field very shallow. However, you know, so for just 1 second, I thought I missed something here. Yes. Okay, this is one that I took at home. This iris grows in my gardens. And so I brought this one in. I used a single light and a foam board on the side as a reflector in order to balance out the light. And I used a black background. A very simple setup, which is a single light, reflector, and a black background. And I was able to get a lot of depth of field and a lot of detail in this iris. So this is one that I've been very happy with. And this is what I'm trying to accomplish when I do tabletop photography. I try to either buy flowers or grow flowers and take the photographs this way, and I think I've been getting some good results. So the useful equipment, of course, you're going to need a camera. I use a tripod because sometimes the exposures are long if I'm trying to get a lot of depth of field. One or more lights. You can do a lot with one light, but 2 lights can be helpful. I like to use a macro lens because it lets me focus in on small things, which is good. I also use extension tubes, and you can also get close-up filters. If you don't have a macro lens, the extension tubes can help convert a standard lens into a close-up lens, and they can be very helpful. Also, since I'm trying to control the subject, there's some tools that I use to try to get the subject in the position I want it to be in. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. These are extension tubes. You can get those for just about any type of camera. The main thing an extension tube does is it just separates your camera lens from the body. And when you do that, you move the camera away, you take away your ability to focus on something in the distance, but you allow your camera to focus much more on something up close. And these come in typically in a set of 3, so you can put on one or all of them, depending on how close you want to get to your subject. On Amazon, I've seen these sets of these going for $30 to $40. The main thing is you want to have the electronics so that your camera will still work with the lens. You'll still get autofocus and auto exposure or whatever you're trying to do so that you can still work with it that way. But a set of extension tubes, they run around $30, maybe $40. And they can do a very nice job. There's no optics in them, there's no glass. It's basically just a wide spot between your camera and the lens. You can also get screw-on close-up filters. These are basically magnifying lenses that you can put on that give you different levels of magnification. Of course, the quality of the glass in this isn't going to be as good as the quality of the glass in your lens, but it can give you some ability to get close, and these can also be stacked with each other. I had a set of these years ago when I had a 35mm camera, and I made use of those before I bought a macro lens. Now, as far as simple lights, you can get a set of lights like these at Home Depot or Lowe's at a very good price. They're very inexpensive. So you can take these, you can clamp them onto a bookcase or onto the back of a chair to have directional light. To start off, to have a fairly simple setup. But with any of these, what you also need to have is bulbs. You need a good light bulb. And you can buy these. These are daylight balanced, compact fluorescent bulbs. And you can get these from, I've seen them from 45 watt up to 105 watt. And I tend to buy the more powerful 105 watt in order to have, more light so that I'm not doing really long exposures. But these give a nice soft light, and they are balanced for daylight, which is helpful. So that's a nice thing to have. So these work well. I recently came across these. I haven't used them. These are dimmable LED bulbs that you can put in and use. And these, I believe, are 85 watt bulbs. And so these, they've got the frosted dome on them, so they're going to give you soft light. And they are dimmable, so you can adjust how much light you're getting from them. And I think that's a nice feature. You can get a setup like this where you have the stands with umbrellas. Sometimes they will come with both translucent umbrellas like these are, as well as reflecting umbrellas. The reflecting umbrellas tend to be a black umbrella that are silver on the inside. So you'd basically be shining your light into the umbrella and having it come back through. I tend to use the translucent umbrellas myself. I like that you get a large area of bright light. It's soft light, but it's directional. So to me, the ideal time to shoot if I'm outdoors is on a bright overcast day, because you get that very bright, soft light, which is really nice for flower photography. And I try to duplicate that indoors by shooting through a translucent umbrella. And I've seen sets like these on Amazon starting for a set of 2 of them around $50. So it doesn't take a whole lot to get started. Another approach are soft boxes. And these basically are a box with a light bulb on the inside and then a translucent panel in the front. And this is basically for the same purpose of giving you that large area of soft white light. And these can be very helpful. I use these. I have a set of these as well as the others. Sometimes I'll set up 2 of them. Sometimes I'll set one behind my flower in order to have a white background. So I have a very bright white background by putting the softbox behind it and then another light in front of it to light the front of the flower. And that can give a very good effect. But these aren't much more than the umbrellas, and these are also good to work with. These are nice, and having them on the stands, they're adjustable for height and angle, and they can be a nice thing to have. This is probably, if I were only going to get one, I would get this one. This is an 18-inch diameter LED ring light. These are used a lot in photography. They're used a lot in portrait photography. If you see people setting up on television, doing their like their Zooms from home, they're often using these lights in order to provide the light for them. The nice thing about these is I put on the white translucent panels, so that softens the light, and it's dimmable. So for some things that I'm doing, I may want brighter light or I may want softer light, and this allows me to control it. You can angle these, you can even turn it so that the light is shooting straight down. So if you want to put the light above your subject, you can just basically turn it at an angle and have it above the subject, and that works very nicely. So you have a lot of flexibility with a set of lights like this, and these run around $100. And I have one, and it's been a very good light to use. The other thing you can get into if you go further into it is an off-camera strobe. And I bought this one. The reason I bought this is that sometimes when I'm looking at something really close up, my exposures were getting long. And I was always worried about having a little bit of camera movement or a little bit of vibration in the subject I was taking. And so a 2-second long exposure, I was always concerned that I was not getting the maximum detail because of vibration. If I use this, it's basically giving me 1,000th of a second flash. And I use this shooting through a translucent umbrella. So I'm still getting that same bright white light, that soft light, but it's very fast. And it helps avoid any camera vibrations or any, any other movement, which is something, especially when I'm looking at something really close and trying to get the maximum detail, I want that effect. Now this is a little clamp that I get. It's a little vise, probably weighs about 4 or 5 pounds, but this is ideal. It has a suction cup base. I can attach it to the table with a suction cup, and then I can hold on to the stem of the flower and then use this. You can adjust the angle to get it whatever angle you want to have it toward the camera. And this can be very nice and helpful to work with. So I have this and I use it pretty much every time I'm photographing flowers. It really comes in handy. Now, the other thing I have that I'm not showing here is an adjustable table. It's a table that's designed for a laptop. And so you're sitting in a chair with your laptop, you have this table, and it's adjustable. You can raise it or lower it. And that helps because a lot of times, depending if I'm taking something that's a very tall flower or other times I'm taking a very short flower, I want to try to adjust the height so that I can match up with my camera better. And so more flexibility for those things is very helpful. It's also nice to have a couple of different types of clamps. These clamps can clamp onto the edge of a table, and you can hold a reflector, for example. I have used them at times to actually hold the stem of a flower, depending on what I was doing. But these can be very helpful just in holding and controlling a whiteboard to give you reflection if you're only using a single light. So these are very handy to combine. They're very adjustable and very flexible. Now, one of the things that we always have to focus on here is depth of field. It can be really helpful to either have shallow depth of field or a lot of depth of field, depending on what you're trying to accomplish artistically. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about that and focus on how to use it to your advantage. This is a set of photographs that I took out at Lewis Ginter a couple years ago. This flower is called a Siberian squill, and it should be blooming right about now if it's still out there. It's only a couple of inches tall, maybe 3 inches tall. So the first shot that I took was at f2.8. very small flower. I was laying on the ground, basically had the camera practically on the ground to do this. And at f2.8, the background is nice and soft. As I increase my f-stop, up to f5.6, I get more depth of field into the flower. So I get more detail in the flower itself. But the background's starting to get a little bit bothersome. At f11, the background is really a problem. And at f22, although I get tremendous detail in the flower, there's way too much showing up in the background. And to me, in this case, that's not pleasant. So I would normally be shooting this at between f2.8 and f5.6 in order to control the background when I'm outdoors. Indoors, I can control my background. So this is a lily, and I shot this at f2.8 because what I wanted to do is have the very tip in focus. That's the main thing I wanted, to have the very front portions of it in focus and not worry about the background. And I had a nice white background for it, so I was able to control that. I took another one at f22 because I wanted to see more of the flower in detail. And I could do that because I had control of the background. Again, a nice white background. I didn't have to worry about what getting more depth of field was going to do to the background. I could take it at a number of different f-stops and see which one did I like best and have control over that. And that's why, to me, the control aspect is so important. Now, for backgrounds, black is a very nice background. It's very easy to work with. It's a very simple background to do, and it can give you a very classic look. White is also a nice background. It takes a little bit more work to get a really white background. You either have to put a soft box behind it to get the whiteness, or a very bright white card, or I use foam board a lot of times to get a nice white foam board behind it. You can also do backgrounds that are naturalistic, that have a pattern or a texture or color. There's a lot of things that you can do in order to have a background behind what you're trying to photograph. This is a lily with the black background. And this is nice because all you need to do for this is you have a black cloth, and velvet works very well. So a couple of yards of black velvet. You can hang it on the wall. You can throw it over the back of a chair. But you position it so that the black fully fills your background. One light to provide the lighting for the flower. And you can have a very nice photograph with a black background with very little fuss. It's a very good way to work. And I think that it really pops on the black background. It gives you a lot of control. This is doing the same thing, but I used a white background. And in this case, I used a soft box in the background to make it very bright. And then I had to have a very bright light to balance. And this is where that dimmable ring light comes in. Because it's dimmable, I can adjust how bright I want it to be against that white background in order to not have it be either blown out from the front or overpowered from the back. So getting that balance between the white light in the background and the light that's on the flower, that's something that you can control if you have a dimmable light. And that can be very helpful to get this. And the other thing is, either this one or the one before it, if you're working in Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever, it's easy to touch up a pure white background or a pure black background. That's really fairly easy to do. Whereas if you have a pattern background, the touch-up can be a little bit more difficult. Okay. Now here's a setup. This is my camera setup. I have one light, and here I am shooting through a translucent umbrella. I have an iris from my garden set up with a white board, foam board in the background. I'm holding it with that little vise that I had shown earlier. I also have a little stand underneath it that can be raised and lowered. So I can raise it or lower it with that other stand. I have one of those clamps holding a piece of white card, which is allowing me to reflect light up to fill in from underneath. Because the light is coming in from the top, I wanted to have a little bit of fill, so I put a little reflector under there. But at the end, as you can see in the screen on the back of the camera, none of that shows up. All you see is the flower in a white background. And so with a pretty simple setup, I can get a pretty nice photograph. And here's one of them that I took in that shoot. This is an iris that grows in my yard every year. And so I bring them in and take photographs of them. So I wanted to use a lot of depth of field because I wanted to get all of the texture and the colors in the beard on the bearded iris. Now here is a background. You can buy backgrounds. It's a 7x5 background. Often used. I've used them for flowers. I've used them for portraits. They come in handy. There's a lot of colors and a lot of patterns. You can get them with woodland scenes. You can do a lot of things buying backgrounds. And then you can get a background stand. And this is a pretty simple one. A lot of them have 2 posts and they're like, 10 feet wide, and you can hang a really big background on it, which is great if you're doing people things. But I've used this with just a 5 foot wide by 7 foot high background. It works very well with flowers. I usually hang a black cloth on it if I'm doing a black background. I have different pattern cloths that I can work with. So I have a lot of options there. And I can also use it if I'm taking photographs of my grandson. So I can get multiple purpose out of it. But a stand like this, it's lightweight, it's easy to maneuver, it's easy to move around, and it does a nice job of holding a background if you want to use different fabric backgrounds that you can get hands on. And this was around, I think, $50 in that range on Amazon. And it's worked out very nicely for me. Something I started doing, though, I was trying different ways to get backgrounds, and buying backgrounds can start to get expensive, especially if you want to do a lot of them. Changing out backgrounds from one photograph to the next can be a little bit troublesome. So I started by making my own backgrounds. And the way I do this is I have a file on my computer in Lightroom of backgrounds that I've made. And a lot of those backgrounds are out of focus pictures of foliage or garden scenes that I've taken, so that you have a pattern, texture, or even looks like the garden out behind you to go behind it. And in this case, I have a flower set up. I have 2 lights on it, one through a softbox, one through an umbrella, and I'm taking the photograph with this in the background. So that's the setup I have. I'm using my flat screen TV as the background and projecting the backgrounds from my laptop. And so I started playing around doing that, and I found that to be pretty helpful. This is a screenshot of some of the backgrounds that I have made that I keep on my computer to work with. And these are basically sections of photographs or photographs that were taken out of focus on purpose in order to try to give me a background that's workable. I have a black background and a white background in here too, so I can actually go from a black background to a white background to a colored background to a textured background, all within just a few seconds, very easily changing the backgrounds out just to see how it's going to look. These are some that I just made recently. I started playing around with these, making these in Topaz Studio 2. I took some of the texture effects and made them into backgrounds. So I've started playing around with these a little bit as well. I'm trying different ways in order to make backgrounds that I can work with at home. So here's a setup. In this case, I have my LED ring light providing the light source. I have an iris for my garden. I have a white foam board to provide some fill light, and one of the backgrounds being projected from my laptop onto the flat screen TV. And so I get this shot, which I'm pretty happy with. I think it looks good. But very quickly, I can change to this background and then to this one. So by having these backgrounds built up in my laptop, I have a lot of flexibility when I sit down and I want to take something and see, okay, now how can I make this look in a different type of background? So with just take the photograph, choose a different background, take another photograph, all within just a few seconds. It allows me to basically go through a whole series of backgrounds and at the end decide what do I really like the best. And so I found this to be very useful for what I've been trying to accomplish. Okay. The other thing we want to do is experiment with lighting. You have a lot of lights you can work with. Even if you only have one light, there's a lot you can do with how you light your scene. This is a hyacinth. I bought this at the grocery store and I let it go for a couple of days until it completely bloomed out, was fully bloomed. And for this, I have one light. I'm using one light through a translucent umbrella, which is to the left and above. And then I have a white reflector on the side. You see, this is one where I used a single light and I raised the light up above so that I was filling up the tulip from above. I played around doing this for a couple of days, really, as the flower filled up. I was trying to get it to light up so that it looked like it was glowing from within. That's what I was really trying for. So with a black background, I had the light behind it and above shining down into it. Okay, so you see something. Okay, going back again, just looking at this. Okay, so there's the hyacinth with the single light. Here's the single light up above. Okay, now here's another tulip. Another tulips that I had bought at the grocery store. And so the first one, the light is pretty much the same lighting I used for that hyacinth. It's a bit above and to the left, shining on it, kind of a reflective looking flower. And it was okay. So I decided to move for the second one. I moved the light more off to the left, almost behind the flower. It's still above, so I'm getting the light, and I kind of like the look. I especially like what it's doing to the petals down there, or the leaves down below. I kind of like that. So I decided to go further. The next one, I went further back behind it and above, further above and behind, starting to get the light inside the tulip, trying to fill it out a little bit more. And then for the final one, I had the light even more above it, more directional down inside it to try to fill up that light from within. I really wanted it to look like it had an inner glow. So just by moving one light around and taking different photographs, I was able to do a couple of different things. Okay, now to control the outcome, use a tripod. Exposures may be long. Time delay and shutter cable are helpful. Oftentimes I'll set it up for a 2-second time delay, click the shutter cable. That helps to take away any vibrations that I might be getting. Typically use manual focus because I'm trying to control exactly where my focal point is going to be. I use live view in order to see what's it going to look like as a finished product. Experiment with the lighting and experiment with backgrounds. There's a lot of things that you can do that way. Okay. Now, here's a calla lily that I photographed, and I love calla lilies. I like to buy these because the calla lily is a very strong flower. So it's not going to wilt when you start, if you cut it and start working with it. It maintains its shape. It maintains its appearance very well. So you can take photographs of it for a good long time. Some flowers that I've taken, they start to wilt as soon as you pick them. And so you have to be set up and ready to move for exactly what you want to do, because the flower won't wait for you. Calla lilies are very nice because they have a lot of curves and a lot of textures and a lot of colors. So there's a lot you can do with calla lilies. They're really cool. And in this case, I just wanted to have this very front curve in focus and then show the other curves, but they didn't have to be in focus. For what I was trying to do in this one, a single light, a black background, and getting the curves here worked out very nicely. Sometimes I want more. I want more detail. I want more depth of field, more than I can get with a single photograph. So about not quite a year ago, I started experimenting with focus stacking. And focus stacking is either changing the focus of the lens while taking multiple photos, or moving the camera slightly between each photograph while taking multiple exposures. This can be done manually. It can be done electronically. And then the photos are combined in software. And I use software that is designed for this purpose called Helicon Focus. Now, this is a calla lily that I took using this approach, where this was made up of 30 individual photographs, all brought together in the software so that every bit of this is in focus. And I got tremendous detail out of it, which is exactly what I was trying to accomplish. I wanted to get all of the detail and have a lot of detail and a lot of very good clarity to it. And I could do that with this approach. There are some of the new cameras out. I know Canon has one of their new mirrorless cameras that will do this just like you would do changing, exposure stacking. This will do focus stacking. But I don't have that camera, and I don't have $4,000 for a new camera body right now. So I didn't do that. Here's another example. This is a Christmas cactus that bloomed, and I really liked what it looked like. And this is a very close-up. I'm using my macro lens. I'm just about as close as I can get with it. And I did a single exposure here at f/22. And I've gotten a lot of detail there. That's pretty good. Instead of that, though, what I prefer is with the focus stacking. Okay, with the focus stacking, I took this. This is at f/8, but this is made up of 20 exposures stacked together. Much more detail. And that's something I couldn't get with a single shot. So by focus stacking, I could get all of that. Here's the single shot at f/22. Here's the stack at f/8. And I get much greater detail here for what I was trying to accomplish. This is what I really like to get, okay? You can get manual focusing rails. You mount your camera onto this, and you can slowly move the camera between shots. And this can mount on a tripod, hold the camera, and slowly, one at a time, you can take all the exposures you want to and just move the camera a little bit between each shot. And these I've seen on Amazon for $50 to $100 for a focusing rail. Then I heard about a company called Cognesis, and they have a system that does this automatically. It's called a stack shot, and this is their top of the line stack shot. It's a motorized focusing rail and the little computer. And I read about this, and then I saw that they had them on Lens Rental. So I got one from Lens Rental to try for a week, and I loved it. And what this does is you set the camera up at the first focal point you want it to take, and then you move it to where you want it to stop taking pictures, and then you enter those 2 points, and it tells you how many millimeters that was. And then you say, okay, how many pictures do I want to take within this space? So maybe I set it up and it moved 25 millimeters. I say, okay, within 25 millimeters, take 20 photos. So it will do that. It will take the first photo, move, take the second photo, move, take the third photo, move. It will do it that way. And then when you're done, you combine the pictures in software and you get the results. Now, I will say that this is not a cheap system. When I ended up buying this, I bought one of the upper end systems they had with a few accessories, and I spent about $1,000 on it. So if you're interested and you want to try it through Lens Rentals, because you'll then know whether you want to spend the money or not. But there is a less expensive way to do this. Now, here's one of the photographs that I took when I first got this from Lens Rentals. This is a dandelion that I picked up on my morning walk. And that was about 20 photographs taken at f5.6, I believe. And to get that level of detail and that amount of depth of field was something that I knew that I couldn't do with a single shot. And so that day I actually ordered my own because I was so happy with the results. Now, I would not be able to get this level of detail, this close, with this level of depth of field with a single shot. Now, if you have a camera that can do that can actually move your focus through the stages, that would be a great way to do it. But if you don't have that, there are some different ways that you can get that to happen with some accessories. This is what I also bought because I heard people talking about this on Facebook. It's called a Helicon FB tube. And this is by the people who did that Helicon Focus software. This is an extension tube. It fits between the camera body and the lens. So it gives you the effect of an extension tube. It does bring you a bit closer to your subject. And this cable here connects it to your phone. And in your phone, you've got an app that says you can program it to say, what lens are you using? What f-stop are you using? And how many exposures do you think you should use? And so I put it on. I went out to the Botanic Gardens. I set it up that I was going to be shooting at f6.3 for maybe 30 shots. It sends the information to this little tube. And then for the rest of the morning, I was out taking photographs. And you'll take it, and every time you take the focus, you set it on burst mode, sort of doing high speed shots, hold down the shutter button, and it just clicks through. And every time it clicks, it moves the focal point a little bit. And I do it on live view so I can see where I'm starting. And I take until I look like, okay, I've gotten as deep as I want to into the subject, and I'm fine with that. And so that gives me more depth of field. And here's an example of that. This is a type of aloe out at the gardens. And normally when I would go out there, this is the type of shot that I would take. f6.3, trying to keep the background from getting too busy. It wasn't a bright day. It was ISO 640 at a 25th of a second on a tripod, trying to get a good shot. And normally I'd be very happy with that shot, and I still am. I think it's a nice photograph. This is with 20 photographs taken using that tube, that FB tube. I started with that first focus and then kept shooting until my depth of field got into the back. It's still shooting at f6.3, so the background is still going to be soft focused, but I was able to get all of that detail and still have the soft focus. So I've been experimenting with that both indoors, I've used it, and also outdoors. To me, it's very helpful to go out to the Botanic Gardens with this and get a little bit more depth of field than I could with just a single shot while still controlling the background. And here's another one. This is a small flower blooming on a bromeliad. I took under basically the same conditions, just enough to get that in focus. I didn't want the whole thing to be in focus. I didn't want it, go into it could actually start to get too busy, but this let me show the important part of this bloom that's opening, and get more depth of field than I would have gotten with a single shot under these conditions. Okay, so I see that there have been some questions come through, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take questions now.
So first, Ray asked, do you have trouble with the white balance from the TV screen as the background or any banding?
Banding sometimes. If I focus up and I get too close, I don't see banding, but I'll see little tiny specks that the screen is made up of. White balance doesn't seem to be an issue. I'm taking the image right off my computer screen, which is a calibrated monitor, and putting it on my screen, and I don't have any problems with banding. If I get too close to it, though, and get too much depth of field, I sometimes pick up just a little bit of texture in the background from the screen.
Great. Steve asked, have you tried just layering your backgrounds in Photoshop instead of projecting from a TV?
Yes, let me share my screen again and show you that. Let's see, where is it? Let me see. Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay, let me Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, this is one of the flowers that I showed earlier. And I've done it different ways. This is just doing a close-up of the flower itself. But sometimes what I'll do in Photoshop, I'll change the background, like in this case from black to white. In this case, to a dark green. And then I tried playing with it in Topaz Studio 2 to put a texture and a frame on it. And here's with a different texture that I put on. So you can do that by changing your backgrounds in, the software. But it depends on what you're photographing, because sometimes if you have a lot of spaces in it, trying to go in and get all of those, that tulip worked out well because it was a very solid looking thing and the background was all around it. But if you're doing something that's a very frilly looking flower, trying to change the background in Photoshop might be more problematic. Also, I'm not all that good at Photoshop.
Okay.
But I mostly use Photoshop slightly, but I have used it for that purpose. Any other questions?
Yes. So Susan asked, when you use the tube, you still use it on the tripod?
I have used it handheld, but only when I've been very stable. And it's difficult because, when I'm out at the Botanic Gardens, the wind is always a problem. Just very small movements because, you're looking at something very close, any little movement. So I normally try to use it on a tripod in order to have greater control over it. I have handheld it, but I've had to do that where I've been braced somewhere where I've been really in control.
Okay. And then Parks asked, does the tube produce images as good as the stack shot? And do you also use the same Helicon software, regardless of whether you use the tube or just do it?
Yes, I use the Helicon Focus software for all of my focus stacking. It's really, really good. I think that the results are probably as good, although I think that the stack shot system, I have greater control over that because when I'm doing it indoors, it's connected to my strobe. So I'm getting, the very quick lighting, and I can set it up. And if there's something I'm doing that's going to take 40 shots, I just hit up and start and walk away from it and let it work. Is I have everything all set up. And I can also control exactly how big, how far each movement is going to be. I can tell it to take a shot every 0.5 millimeter or every millimeter or 2 millimeters, whatever I feel I want. Whereas with the tube, it's got a different build to it, but I've had very good results with it. So I've been happy. Now, I didn't say about the price. That tube cost $209, which I did not think was bad. The negative to it is that you want to order one now, maybe, because they ship out of the Ukraine. So they might be hard to get to. Yeah, that could be a challenge. But right. I got one after I saw some people posting on Facebook using it. So I thought, let me try this. Because for $209, the ability, what I was thinking about is if I wanted to take my stack shot system out to the gardens, or going out to the park in wildflower season, that would be a challenge. But with this, I'll be able to do that quite readily.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Tom. This has been an excellent presentation. We're gonna stop the recording here in a minute, and let's take at least a 5-minute break before we start with our next session.